We are both in our 20s and have been married for over 2 years. We unexpectedly met in a public place, started chatting, exchanged contact information, and the rest, as they say, became history. For me, at least, it was love at first sight. We dated for 6 months and then cohabited for a year before getting married. Due to my parents' insistence, we had a grand wedding, and they paid for all the expenses, except for the bar bill and our honeymoon, which was paid for by Deegan's parents. My parents really like Deegan, and his parents also have a deep affection for me. Our marriage is wonderful, and I don't want to change a thing. Deegan is very good to me, and I am the same to him. It's just our natural way of expressing love. Now you might be wondering, what's wrong with this picture? Well, the problem is that I cheated with a colleague 2 months ago, and now every time Deegan is good to me, I feel guilty. Every time he is kind to me, I feel extremely guilty. I am overwhelmed by guilt and feel unworthy of his kindness. To make up for my betrayal, I have been paying special attention to him since we returned from our trip. Although we have always been naturally affectionate with each other, I have taken it to another level. My dad even jokingly teased us, suggesting we get a room because we constantly display affection in public in one form or another. As I mentioned earlier, I don't want to go into detail, but I want to clarify how the affair with my colleague developed. I was selected for a special task force at work. This project is a significant venture for the company and very important for our shareholders. Working on this task is satisfying but extremely demanding and stressful, so much so that one of the female members of our team had a nervous breakdown. Most of our project work was done remotely, but we did have 3 face-to-face team meetings. As we approached the completion of the project, there was an issue with the part one was responsible for, which required me to spend a week at one of our regional offices to resolve the problem. Initially, 3 of us were supposed to go, but at the last minute, the woman I mentioned had to cancel for obvious reasons. This left me and another colleague, whom I will call Percy, to solve the problem and ensure the project was completed on time. Our schedule was tight, working continuously from 7 in the morning until after 10 at night for the first 2 nights. We were together every moment, working in the office together, ordering meals for lunch and dinner. I was very stressed and felt like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown myself. Fortunately, by 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, we managed to solve the problem. To celebrate, we went to a nice restaurant and drank too much. When we got back to the hotel, that's when it happened. I cheated on my husband. At first, it was a spontaneous, thoughtless act. At first, I didn't have any negative emotions because I somehow blamed it on our hard work. So the next night, Percy and I repeated the behavior of the previous night. However, after being together on Thursday, the harsh reality of our actions hit both Percy and me, and we quickly regretted what we had done. Percy knew I was happily married, and I knew he was engaged. We decided right then to forget all about it, as if it never happened. We were also concerned that if the news of this affair spread in our company, it could damage our reputations and potentially jeopardize our jobs, as it happened during a business trip paid for by the company. That night we parted ways, agreeing not to speak or communicate unless absolutely necessary. This wouldn't be too difficult, as the project we were working on was a unique situation, and we lived on opposite sides of the country, making it unlikely for us to meet again. We ended things that night, or at least I thought we did. On the flight home, at first, I felt good, but when I thought about seeing Deegan at the airport, I started to feel anxious. I managed to stay composed until I arrived at the pickup area and saw him waiting there with a bright smile on his face. I burst into tears as soon as I saw him, and we hugged and kissed tightly. We held on to each other for a long time, so much so that an airport police officer approached us, knocked on the window, and gestured for us to clear the pickup lane. Deegan asked me what was wrong, and I explained that I had been under a lot of stress and missed him so much that I couldn't help but break down when I saw him. He understood, and that night, we spent a wonderful and passionate night together. Since I came back, I have been taking extra care of him. He enjoys the attention, which he deserves, but I am suffering inside. Guilt is eating away at my soul, and it's getting worse every day. My struggle with sleep and appetite is affecting my work. I just want to be close to my husband and show him how much I love him. I've even been having nightmares that he finds out about the affair and leaves me. Last week, we decided to try for a baby, which has heightened all my emotions. I keep thinking that I don't deserve him, or that he deserves someone better. I don't think I can go on like this for another week. No one knows about the affair except Percy and me. My situation is even more difficult because I have no one to talk to. I feel like my conscience is urging me to tell the truth and confess to Deegan what I've done, but I'm afraid it will break our relationship. I understand that if I confess, it will break his heart, and he may never see me the same way again. However, I believe he might eventually forgive me, given his deep love for me and his naturally kind and caring nature. So, my dilemma is, should I reveal to my husband my meaningless affair from 2 months ago, or should I keep silent and make up for it in other ways? I really want to hear how people who have been in similar situations have dealt with it. Please honestly share the positive and negative outcomes. First update, 32 days later, I want to express my gratitude to everyone for your heartfelt responses. I have read every reply carefully and appreciate your willingness to share your personal experiences. After much contemplation and 3 sessions with an excellent therapist, I have decided to tell my husband. This will be very difficult for me and will undoubtedly break his heart, but I must do it. To prepare for this, I have made a detailed timeline of the affair, which was not difficult because it was purely physical and lasted less than 24 hours with no emotional attachment. My therapist also provided some useful articles teaching me how to support a spouse dealing with infidelity, especially what behaviors to avoid. I am mentally prepared for the possibility that he may need to be apart from me for a while, and based on what I have learned, this reaction is completely normal. Although if he chooses to react that way, I will feel very sad. As I mentioned earlier, my husband is a kind and caring person, he is generous and protective, so I do not expect him to respond in that way. On the contrary, I believe he will feel hurt and disappointed because of my actions. I am mentally prepared for a range of reactions. Wish me luck. 13 months later update. Hello everyone, it has been a long time since my last post. Many of you have contacted me to ask how things are going. I want to thank you for your interest and concern. I wanted to provide an update earlier, but life has been quite busy, and I simply did not have the time or energy. Things have finally started to settle down for me, so here I am. I will continue from where I left off. If you remember, I was about to confess to my husband about my brief affair with a colleague. My plan was to have that conversation on a Saturday morning, and I went ahead with it as planned. I made sure we were both there that morning because we had plans in the afternoon, and I wanted to talk without any interruptions. On the morning of the confession, I was extremely nervous, and I almost backed out. Looking by, opened the door to find my parents standing there. I was about to suggest they come back later because Deegan and I were having a private discussion, but my mother said Deegan had called them and confessed everything. I was in disbelief and speechless. My father asked if it was true. Did I have an affair with a colleague? I admitted it and began to cry. My mother asked how I could do such a thing. Before I could respond, Deegan came out of the office and started talking to my parents, completely ignoring me and referring to me in the third person. He asked my father to take me away because he was not in a good state of mind. I kept trying to communicate with him, but he kept ignoring me, focusing only on my parents as if I were invisible. Desperately seeking his attention, I approached him and hugged him. Although he didn't push me away, he didn't hug me back either. After I let go, he returned to the office and locked the door. My parents started asking me questions about the affair, which upset me, and I ran into the bedroom. My mother followed me in, and we talked for a while before she helped me pack some luggage to leave. I spoke to Deegan through the door, expressing my love for him and saying that I would leave until he was ready to talk. I told him I was going to my parents' house and would stay there until he needed me. For the rest of the day, I received no message from him. I tried to contact him a few times, but he did not respond. My last text mentioned that I was coming over because I was worried about him. He replied, asking me to give him some space. I spent the whole day crying, repeatedly asking myself how this could have happened. When I woke up on Sunday morning, my parents were sitting at the table drinking coffee with sad expressions on their faces. I thought they were upset about what I had done, but there was more. My father told me Deegan had come by earlier in the morning. I was excited and asked if they had talked to him. My father replied, "No, we didn't see him." Then I asked how they knew he was there. My father explained it was because he had parked my car in the driveway, filled with all my luggage. Hearing this, I just said, "What?" and ran out to see my SUV parked there, filled with garbage bags. Seeing this scene, I broke down and fell to the ground crying. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I told my parents I needed to go to my house and talk to Deegan. When I got there, he was home but didn't answer the door. I tried to open the door with my key, but the inside deadbolt was activated, and I couldn't get in. My next thought was to enter through the garage, but when I checked my sun visor, I realized Deegan had taken the remote control. I thought about entering through the garage keypad, but he had changed the password, effectively locking me out of my own house. Considering it was early Sunday morning, I didn't want to disturb the neighbors, so I started texting him. At first, I was polite, but when he didn't respond, I sent a text saying this was my place too, and he couldn't just lock me out like this. His response was just, "Sue me." I couldn't believe that the person I had loved and who had always been kind and caring was treating me like this. I knew I deserved the consequences, but not like this. At least I expected him to remain civil and not act irrationally. In the end, I went back to my parents' house, locked myself in my old room, and spent most of the time crying, completely confused by the events of the past 24 hours. That day I continued to try to contact Deegan, but he still did not respond. On Monday morning, I contacted my boss and asked for 3 days off to deal with the situation. On Monday morning, I went back to the house and managed to get in. Deegan was not there, and when I entered our bedroom, I noticed all his clothes were gone. When I went into the office, I saw something that broke my heart. I found our wedding album cover next to the shredder. Deegan had removed all the photos and shredded them. I couldn't believe it. As I walked through the house, I noticed all our group photos were gone. After further searching, I found empty frames, and it was clear he had also shredded them. I felt very sad and couldn't understand what was happening. I decided to call Deegan's workplace and speak to the receptionist. I asked if I could speak to him, and she told me he would not be in the office for the rest of the week because he had taken a leave of absence. Then I contacted my mother-in-law, who answered the phone and mentioned that Deegan had told her and my father-in-law about everything. I asked her if she knew where he was, and she confirmed she did but refused to tell me and abruptly ended the call. I was hurt by this situation because I was very close to my in-laws. On that Wednesday, I started receiving calls from Percy. I chose to ignore all his calls and sent them to voicemail. After listening to his messages, he urgently asked me to call him as soon as possible. Finally, in his last message, he mentioned that Deegan had somehow contacted his fiancée and revealed everything about the two of us. Hearing this, I called Percy, who was furious. He reminded me that we promised not to tell anyone anything. I admitted I should have informed him before speaking to my husband, but I didn't expect his reaction. Percy then revealed that he told his fiancée my husband was lying and nothing had happened. He told me she was going to call me, and he insisted I tell her the same story. I told him I couldn't comply with that request, and he began to plead with me. When I reiterated my refusal to lie, he began to attack me with hurtful words and insults. He kept on, so I decided to hang up the phone and block his number. Soon after, I received a call from his fiancée, and I revealed everything to her. She listened quietly as I recounted the events, and when I finished, she suddenly hung up the phone. However, the ordeal was not over. When I returned to work the next day, I was called to the HR director's office, who happened to be my friend. At first, I didn't suspect anything was amiss, but when I arrived, I noticed the HR manager and the security director were also present. I felt I might be in trouble. They asked me to sit down and said they had questions for me. They told me someone had contacted them, claiming Percy and I had an affair during company time and used company resources. My heart sank, and I began to cry. Then I continued to confess what happened but clarified that nothing had occurred during official working hours. The HR director explained that when salaried employees are on a business trip, the entire trip is considered working hours. She continued to clarify that the hotel room is considered a company resource because it is paid for by the company. They then inquired about the second night when Percy and I were together. They asked if I had dinner with Percy that night, and I reluctantly admitted it. They then asked if we drank alcohol, to which I replied affirmatively, revealing that I had 2 drinks. Next, they asked if I had bought the alcohol, and I answered no, Percy had. The HR director pointed out that this violated company policy because employees are not allowed to use another employee's card to purchase food or drinks. As a result of these violations, I received a final written warning, while Percy faced termination. To clarify, I did not receive any preferential treatment because of my gender. If Percy was the only one facing these issues, he would have faced the same consequences. But unfortunately for him, the situation was worse. Percy was fired because he stayed an extra day without a valid business reason and charged the entire cost, including flight change fees, hotel accommodation, and all his meals, including 2 bottles of wine. He extended his stay just to be with me the next night. I deeply regret what happened to Percy. He was an outstanding employee with a bright future, but now he is unemployed, and his fiancée has left him, all because of my actions. As for me, any aspirations for promotion seem unlikely after this incident. The following Monday at work, Deegan served me with divorce papers at the reception desk. The receptionist called to notify me of a delivery, and when I arrived, a man was waiting with a bouquet of flowers. I hoped it was a gift from Deegan, and it was. However, after I signed for the package, the man handed me the flowers and then handed me the divorce papers, saying, "Ms. Jenny, you have officially been served with divorce papers." At that moment, my world collapsed, and I couldn't help but shed tears. I had to leave the office and decided to take a week off. In the 7 months that followed, I did everything I could to save my marriage, but Deegan refused to communicate with me. In fact, he hasn't said a single word to me since my confession. Now our divorce is finalized, but I am still struggling emotionally. I cherish and miss the way he was, a kind person, before my infidelity. I understand that that person no longer exists. I admit that I should bear the consequences of my actions, but I never expected Deegan's reaction. I knew that the likelihood of me confessing could lead to the end of our relationship, but I thought it was very slim. I would like to end with a message to my husband: "Baby, if you happen to see these, I want you to know that I am truly sorry and will always love you." Well, that was an interesting story. Now let's move on to another exciting story. Stay tuned and let's delve deeper. I am 36 years old, and my wife is 38. When we first met, I was a junior, and she was a senior. From that day on, we have been together. After dating for 3 years, we decided to live together. Another 3 years later, we got married. 2 years after that, our happiness increased as my wife became pregnant, and we welcomed our daughter into the world. Like any typical family, we also have a considerable amount of domestic disagreements, but we can always reconcile quickly, sometimes even during the argument. Overall, we are a traditional family. After completing my studies, I started my career and worked hard to climb the corporate ladder. Eventually, I earned enough to buy a spacious 4-bedroom apartment. We invested a lot of money in renovations and happily moved into our new home. After my wife finished her maternity leave, she resumed her career, which progressed quite well. She found a good position and started earning a decent income. With our joint efforts, we achieved financial prosperity. Over time, we had everything we needed, including a new apartment for our growing daughter, luxury cars, and all the comforts one could desire. I deeply love my wife and have been faithful to her throughout our marriage. I am not an alcoholic, but occasionally I enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. I recently quit smoking. We always plan our holidays together, and I have cultivated a passion for diving and skiing. Although my wife chooses not to dive due to fear, she learned how to ski. Our lives revolve around work, making money, and enjoying the rewards of our hard work. My wife's job involves international business and often requires her to meet with colleagues from abroad for negotiations. Gradually, I began to notice that her interactions with these colleagues seemed to last longer than before, which initially aroused my curiosity, but I didn't pay much attention at first. Another noticeable change was that she received Snapchat messages at night, which strangely stopped when she was around her foreign colleagues. A few times, I checked her phone after she fell asleep, but all the messages were deleted. I noticed that the last message always arrived around 7 p.m., which records the sound around her phone for about 10 minutes. A few minutes later, a recording appeared on my account, and I heard my wife's voice talking to a man in a room in English, and I understood every word. Their conversation revolved around everyday life matters, accompanied by laughter. I realized they were alone in that room. Then, the sudden clinking sound in their laughter made my heart race. At that moment, I sent another command to record for another 20 minutes and capture the surrounding environment. Shockingly, the photo showed a black square, indicating that the phone was placed face down when the camera was activated. Soon after, I instructed the program to quickly take a photo using the front camera. The result showed the phone placed on the bedside table in the room, partially capturing the headboard and the wall lamp next to it. 15 minutes later, another recording emerged, sending chills down my spine as I heard their laughter and conversation once again. I found myself in a state of disbelief and shock, as if my world was collapsing right before my eyes. I was stunned, poured myself a drink, and instructed the program to record for another 4 hours, during which I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. The next morning on Thursday, I broke down completely because my daughter had to go to school. I told her she didn't need to attend class that day and also informed my boss that I would take a few days off until Monday. My wife was expected to return on Sunday, so I settled down and started listening to those 4 hours of recordings. However, I could only bear 40 minutes of it because at that moment, I distinctly heard the sound of my wife's pleasure, a sound I had known for 13 years. It felt like a sharp knife had pierced my heart, causing emotional and physical pain. Shocked and at a loss, I rushed to the bathroom, feeling nauseous. I wasn't sure if it was due to a hangover or the current situation. I stood under a cold shower for 20 minutes, desperately seeking relief. Afterward, I took our daughter to visit her grandparents, promising to explain everything later, and then returned home alone. At lunchtime, my wife called to sincerely inquire about my health, and I stood there silent, unable to utter a word, pretending the phone connection was poor. I told her I wasn't feeling well and would stay at home for a few days, leaving our daughter in her grandmother's care. That day felt like the most painful of my life. I went through my own personal hell, feeling completely lost and unsure of how to proceed. My thoughts were consumed by a constant buzzing sound, drowning out my own ideas. I sat on the sofa, crying like a child, overwhelmed by waves of anger and indifference. The more I vented my emotions, the more they seemed to numb me. By the end of the day, I was emotionally exhausted. That evening, I went back to the spy software account and started sending instructions to the phone. I received photos, some taken from her bag, others from the table. There were also recordings of her performance at a restaurant with many voices, presumably her colleagues. Then, as the evening progressed, I found something different. The phone was placed on the bedside table again, capturing her voice and another person's, but this time without intimate sounds. I couldn't bear it anymore and called her. After 4 rings, she answered, clearly out of breath. I asked why she was panting, and she explained that the hotel elevator was broken, and she had to climb the stairs to her room. We chatted for a while, and I tried my best to maintain a calm and steady voice. Eventually, I mentioned that I was going to sleep, wished her good night, and quickly sent a command to the spy program, requesting a quick series of photos using the front camera. Her mistake happened at that moment. After our call, she placed her phone on the bed instead of the bedside table. As a result, the front camera began capturing slightly tilted but genuine momentary photos. These images revealed her sitting on top of someone, her head thrown back. There was then a recording that captured unmistakable sounds, immediately exposing her actions. That was the last straw that broke me. I recorded these notes and materials. At that point, she was a complete stranger to me. From that moment on, I stopped further investigation until Sunday because everything became painfully clear. I was contemplating my next steps. Should I pursue a divorce? What about our 6-year-old daughter? Later that Sunday evening, she returned home, eager to kiss me. I pulled away, telling her I was still unwell. I had an urge to confront her and vent my anger. Instead, I retreated to the office and slept on the sofa. The next morning, I woke up earlier than her and couldn't bear to be around her, so I went to work. I went through the motions of the day and then urgently requested a week off from my boss. I saved all the evidence on a USB drive and then called my wife. I told her I had to go on a one-day business trip but asked her not to pick up our daughter from her grandmother's because I had planned a surprise for that night. When I got home, I quickly packed my bags. She helped me pack, acting polite and innocent, yet her insincerity made me angry. I took my bags, left the USB drive on the bedside table in the bedroom, and called a taxi to the second apartment we had prepared for our daughter. Once there, I called a friend and suggested we go abroad for a few days. He agreed, and we hastily booked a flight to Munich for the next morning. It was in Munich that I confessed everything to him. We explored the city, socialized with other women, and to be honest, I had no feelings for my wife anymore. I ignored her calls and only texted claiming she didn't understand how things had escalated to this point. She even began to berate herself and so on. But I realized that I no longer felt sympathy or anger towards her. When she was done, I would switch off my hostile mode and engage in a conversation with her, but not yet, the time was not right.